Thank you so much for joining us today for our third conversation series in our reimagining mobility conversation series. And my name is Heather Feldner. I am co-coordinating these events with Kat Steele, who will introduce herself in a second. But I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Washington and one of the associate directors of CREATE. And I am a cisgendered white woman. I have short brown and gray hair. I'm wearing a blue sweater today with dark glasses. And I am sitting in my office with a window to my right and pictures of my son's drawings behind me. And I use she, her pronouns and don't currently identify as disabled. And I am, let's see, what else am I forgetting to remember? I am really glad that you are all here today, and just a few notes about the conversation today. This is a series that's hosted by CREATE, which is a center that stands for the Center for Research and Education on Technology, on Accessible Technology and Experiences. And this center spans departments of rehabilitation medicine, mechanical engineering, human-centered design and engineering, the iSchool, and computer science. And it's focused on research and innovation to both make technology accessible and to use technology to make the world more accessible. So just before we begin, a few logistical items and accessibility notes. We're going to be using microphones for the session today. And again, if you'd like to access the captions, if on the bottom of your Zoom controls, you'll have a button that says CC Live Transcript, and you can either select subtitles or viewing a full transcript. And the meeting is also being recorded, and we'll post the recording along with an edited transcript after the session. And if you would like a large print copy of the transcript, please go ahead and email one of us. And we'll make sure to put our email in the chat. And we ask that you do whatever you need to do to participate in the session today. So you feel free to have your camera on or off. Feel free to move around, draw, knit, fidget, or just listen. And you can feel free to participate in whatever way you feel most comfortable, whether to if you would like to type something in the chat, if you'd like to use the raise hand feature and speak over your audio or your video, that would be great. You can also feel free to email us asynchronously if you choose to do so. And we would just ask that everyone in the session today would mute their own microphones unless they're speaking. And we also want to recognize that accessibility is an ongoing process. So you've heard us talk about these features here today. We're continuing to learn every step of the way. So any suggestions that you might have for us, please do let us know in terms of just accessibility feedback or general feedback for our reimagining mobility conversations. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kat, who is going to introduce our speaker today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Heather. It's so great to see you all again, and especially as spring is coming. I'm Kat Steele. I'm an associate professor in mechanical engineering here at the University of Washington. I'm a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and I have my blue short sleeve shirt on for the first time of the season. And I have my brick fireplace behind me. So we're really excited today to welcome Barry Long. He's been a fantastic member of our Puget Sound community and a great partner in crime here, but he has quite the unique background. Today, he is a member of the Marketplace Sotheby's International Realty and a voting member of the Washington Building Code Council representing people with disabilities. But he has a long career and background in marketing and sales and speaking, and has spoke to the majority of our leading companies here in the Puget Sound and beyond, sharing both his experience and helping teams grow in their leadership. From 2011 to 2016, he also served on the Washington State Governor's Committee on Disability Issues. And like I said, in his new role, he's also been transforming the role of real estate, which is what he's gonna be sharing with us today. And so we're really excited to have Barry here to help us and challenge all of us a bit to reimagine mobility. And so I'm gonna turn it over to him shortly to tell us a little bit of his story. And then Heather and I will follow up with a few questions, but we are gonna leave a good chunk of this for audience questions as well. So make sure you're thinking of questions, and Nicole Zano, a PhD student here, is also gonna be helping us monitor the chat and keep track of questions. So if something comes up, feel free to type it in there while we're going. But without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Barry, who is gonna share a little bit of his story about how he ended up in real estate and what exactly they've been up to in the past few years. So thank you again, Barry.
You bet. Thank you, Kat. I am a 52-year-old white man with short, spiky hair. I'm sitting in my makeshift office, and over my shoulders are, one is an MC Escher print, the other is my newest birthday present, which is a Rush 2112 album autographed by all three members that my family gave to me. And then there's a couple of pictures of my 15, well, they weren't 15 in the photos, but my now 15-and-a-half-year-old twins. So it's been an interesting ride. I grew up in Bellevue. I was born in Pullman and then grew up in Bellevue, and then right out of high school moved to Alaska. Ended up on a remote island fishing and hunting Alaska. And then what I would do in the off season was travel around the country and advertise for our lodge in Alaska. And while I was down in Portland, Oregon doing the Sportsman Show back in 1991, I had my motorcycle shipped to every town that I went to in our booth. So I had transportation, and as I was on my way to the Sportsman Show on a Sunday morning, it was actually February 10th of 1991, I went to pass 4 cars at the same time, and I was doing 100 plus miles an hour. And I didn't see that the very front vehicle on that line of cars was taking a left-hand turn. So as I shot by him at 100 miles an hour, he hit my back tire, and I flew off an embankment, hit a building, and paralyzed myself from the chest down. So I'm now a manual wheelchair user, and I have been for just a little over 30 years now. After several months in the hospital, I took 2.5 years, I went back to college, and I actually went to school at Bellevue Community College at the time, now Bellevue College. Got a marketing degree, and the day I graduated from high school, I jumped on an airplane and took 2.5 years and backpacked around the world. So wanted to go see what life was like being in a wheelchair. And I grabbed my best friend and literally went around the world, visited 19 countries. And as I was traveling, I ended up talking to Rotary clubs and talking to different business groups about what it was like traveling. And when I got home, I started a public speaking company, and I actually started talking to kids. I was doing full school assemblies about safety and making good choices. And then that led into doing corporate keynotes. And then for years and years and years, I've been doing corporate keynotes. And like Heather said, I've spoken to many of the companies that we have in the Seattle area. So it leads to real estate, because I was doing a keynote for a local real estate company, marketed by Sotheby's International Realty, and they asked me if I would come in and do a leadership presentation and talk about teamwork and goal setting and some things. And while I was doing that presentation, the conversation got brought up about accessibility in real estate. And I may have made a little bit of fun of them, that they're Sotheby's, and Sotheby's is one of the, if not largest real estate company in the world. And well, how come it was broken? Why couldn't they fix it? And so be careful what you ask for, because I said, well, you guys should fix it. And about a month later, the owner of Marketplace Sotheby's took me out to lunch, and Chad and I were sitting at the table, and he said, we've done some homework, Barry, and we've looked all over the country for realtors who specialize in the ADA, and we've only found one. And we'd like it if you would take a look at this person, see what it is that they're doing, so we can emulate that. And we opened up the computer, and I looked at this person who was an ADA specialist, and I just started laughing. And he went, well, what's so funny? I went, well, this guy lives in Ada, Oklahoma, which is spelled ADA. He has absolutely nothing to do with accessibility at all. He just lives in a town, and ADA came up in the search. So we looked around the country and realized that there wasn't anybody in the whole country that specialized in accessibility, and that residential real estate was truly broken for people who needed accessibility features. So uh, they convinced me to get into real estate. It took a little convincing. I had to come home and convince my wife that I needed a new career at 47 years old. And but Marketplace Sotheby supported me and said, we're going to do everything we can to get you into this. And I went and got licensed, and I dove headfirst into real estate. And what I found was that the system was broken because all real estate is truly a database driven enterprise. That all real estate, every single transaction is about data. And the data is how many bedrooms and how many bathrooms and what's the square footage and what's the school district, and all of this information that's just housed in what we call MLSs, which are multiple listing services. And there's many multiple listing services around the country. So once I got into the system and started looking at it to figure out, well, the ADA was passed 30 years ago. Why hasn't this been fixed? And I found that one of the problems was is that people were afraid of the word disability and doing it wrong. They weren't thinking about it from the accessibility side. So as I got into it and realized that there was no place for this data to live. And there were some MLSs around the country who had tried. Actually, our Northwest multiple listing service had tried. And what they had was a little button that just said disabled access. Well, anybody who works within the disability community knows that disabled access isn't really encompassing for all the different types of accessibility and disabilities that are out there. So it was like saying it was green. Well, what shade of green? So the Northwest Multiple Listing Service was fantastic for me, and they opened the door up to start this conversation about how we were going to change the system. And luckily for me, I was at a Northwest Universal Design Council meeting trying to learn about what accessibility meant in real estate. And someone said, you need to meet this guy, Tom Minty. He's been trying to do what you're doing. And I figured he probably lived in Kansas somewhere. I called him up and said, you don't know me, but I'm trying to change the system for accessibility in real estate. And he said, I really like to do that too. We found out that we live 8 minutes from each other. We both live in Woodinville, and he's become my partner. So we actually did something that hasn't really been done in real estate before. We partnered up with 2 different companies. I'm Marketplace Sotheby's International Realty. He works for John L. Scott. We went to the multiple together, and they opened up the doors for us to help change the system. So what we did was we went out and we learned what accessibility truly was. And I had no idea how much I didn't know about disability and accessibility, being in a chair for 25 years. I actually started by taking 5 quadriplegics out to lunch, which is kind of dangerous because they're really crazy. And I asked them the question of, all right, you guys, what are your dream houses? And I figured I was going to get these answers that I had already, set in front of myself, that it was going to be a 1 level and it was going to be this and it was going to be that. And I got 5 completely different answers to what accessibility meant to them. One of them said, I've got kids and I want to be able to access every single square inch of my house. So even though I can't, because I'm a quadriplegic and I can't move anything under my neck, I want to be able to walk and talk my kids through what it is that they want to do. So I want full access to every square inch of my house. And the dude sitting right next to him went, oh, well, that's not really me, Barry. I actually want a 3-story house. No, what are you talking about? And when I'm in a 3-story house, he said, I've got caregivers that take care of me all day long. And when they're not in my space and taking care of me, I want them out of my square footage. They can all walk upstairs. I want them to be able to go upstairs. And when my mom comes over to visit, love to see her, but don't really want her in my face all the time. I want her to be able to go stay in a room downstairs. So I realized that I had a quadriplegic who was looking for a 3-story house. And it really opened up the world for Tom and I as we were trying to put this together, saying, well, what does it need to look like when accessibility is so relative, that it's so different for every single person? So we really had to look outside of ourselves to figure out, how do we do this to make it work for everybody? So in a nutshell, we broke down accessibility. We looked at what does accessibility really mean, and then we really had to focus on real estate. And we knew that we were dealing with technology because of the database, so we were slightly limited by what the technology would do. But for the most part, it was, let's break down a residential piece of property into sections. And then from there, we can get into the weeds of exactly what details there are in a piece of property. So everything is searchable or non-searchable. So when you go to look for a house, you're looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in North Seattle, and And that's just the data that another realtor has actually put into the system. So they've dropped that into the technology of that database. So what we did was we decided that we wanted to come up with search criteria that people could look for accessibility. And it took us 2 years because we had to change the taxonomy of residential real estate nationally. So we had to get everything that we did approved by what's called RESO, which is the Real Estate Standards Organization. So we really needed to make it as simple as possible because, again, back to my question of why hadn't it been done before, some of the MLSs had that one button that said disabled access, but some had actually tried to do the right thing, but they had 150 features that they added to their database of how high the light switches were off the floor and all of this information that realtors aren't going to take the time to use. So what we did is we came up with a set of 10 searchable criteria for a residential real estate piece of property that then a listing agent can take that data, put it into the system, and then a buyer's agent who's looking for accessibility can find now that information by searching in the database. So for example, we have approach, we have entrance, living space or community space, we have bathroom, bedroom, utilities. We have one for smart technology, which I'll talk about quickly in a second. We have one for lifts, ramps, and elevators. And then elevator is the only one that we split. So there's 2 elevator sections in the multiple listings database because houses can have elevators that are not accessible. So ours is, accessible. And then smart technology, we're actually about ready to change because we found that brokers are saying, yes, our house has Alexa. So it's got smart technology in it, but the smart technology we're talking about is me being able to use my voice and lower the shades and turn the lights on and off and turn the alarm on and off. So we broke the house down now into, searchable data points that a listing agent can look and they can see what accessibility their home has. They can add that information to the database, and now another realtor who's looking for accessibility can go search that criteria and they can now find accessibility. And Tom and I were nervous at first because we didn't know whether realtors would use it or not. And this is only now in the state of Washington. Actually, I take it back. There's 3 states now that have implemented what we've done, but it's not something that the online real estate companies have picked up yet. So you can't go to whichever the online real estate company you'd like to use and find accessibility. You have to have a realtor do it. But we were hoping if we could get 500 listings our first year that used accessibility criteria, then that would be a huge win for us. And we found we had 6,400 homes that were added to the database that have accessibility. And we just passed our 2-year mark, and we know that number is well over 10,000 now. So we've been able to add something to the system that now allows people who have accessibility features in their home to list those, which adds value to their house. And then for those of us that are looking for accessibility, the system allows for us to find it. So it's interesting, as we were doing our research, and I'll talk just a little bit about kind of the data, is I don't know to the specific extent of numbers when it comes to how many people in our country have a mobility disability, but from everything that I've read, it's about 1 in 5. So that's 20% of the population has some kind of a mobility need, and whether it's temporary or whether it's permanent, whether it's progressive or whether it's just age. We have 85 million boomers that are turning 65 at 10,000 a day for the next 10 years. So, when it comes to the number of people that this is affecting, we had no idea how many people would actually utilize this criteria and want to be able to access this data. So it's been a really fun experience for us. So what we did was, just to kind of sum up my intro, is that Tom and I created a form that's called the Form 6B, and I jokingly say it's the 6-berry, but Tom wanted it to be called the 6T, and that it's for the listing agent to take that Form 6B, and then what we've done is we've got those 10 sections of criteria. So let's just say, for example, the kitchen, but then on that form, a realtor can go in with just a tape measure and a camera, and they can add all the details of that specific kitchen's accessibility. Does it have roll under sinks, or does it have an oven that you can reach all of the knobs in the front, or does it? We actually, the one thing I didn't mention was we also have a section in the search criteria for hearing and vision. So if there are different features within a home that are for somebody who's got a hearing impairment or a vision impairment, that they can list those things as well. And we wanted to make it as easy as possible for the realtor to be able to go in and not have to know too much about accessibility, not have to know really anything about disability, and yet still be able to list that home with the features that it's got. So trying to think if there's anything else right now. So one of the other things that we did was we were trying to figure out how we can find homes that don't necessarily have true accessibility in them when somebody's looking. For example, my home is totally accessible. It's totally wheelchair accessible for me. But one of my friends in a power chair wouldn't be able to get into my bathroom because they wouldn't be able to make the turn into the corner. So even though my house I can list it as totally accessible, it might not be accessible for everybody. So what we've done is we've come up with a bit of different criteria that we're looking at houses now. And one is accessible. Is my home accessible? And I can say yes, that it is. I can pull out my Form 6B and I can list all the criteria of accessibility in that form. I can put it out there, and then somebody who's looking for my home can find it. And then what we've got is we're calling it adaptable. So my home is accessible for me, but it's adaptable for a power chair user, because with very little effort, you could widen a couple of doorways, you could do a couple of transitional things, and then that house would be accessible for them, but it's adaptable now. And then a third criteria that I just want people to be thinking about, because right now with 1 in 5 people in our country having a mobility need, it's not just about me, it's about my family, because my family is also part of that, of what it is that I need. So we've got this term visitability is what we're using. And visitability is like my dad's place. Let's just say, for example, that I can get into my dad's place. I can get in, I can use the bathroom, I can go to the living space, but say that the bedrooms are all upstairs because he really doesn't want me to stay. So my dad's place is visitable. So we're now trying to educate realtors that there's this set of criteria that you don't necessarily just have to find that already perfectly accessible home for somebody who has specific needs. You need to make sure that that home is adaptable, and you can probably or possibly make it accessible if it's got good bones. Or maybe you don't even need it to be totally accessible. Maybe you've just got a friend has a mobility need, and you want them to come over and have a Super Bowl party at your house. So as long as your home is visible, then that totally works, and it'll work for everybody. This is my son Gavin, everybody, and I think he's getting me back for photobombing his school. So that's what happens to Dad when he photobombs his kids in their class, is they get you back. I wish you could all hear how hard he's laughing right now. So I have no idea where I was. That's awesome. So here, one other just quick statistic, and I'll throw it at you, Kat. You and Heather can bomb questions at me, but I want to do a quick explanation of the ADA and how this affects residential real estate. So the Americans with Disabilities Act is for public consumption. It was put in place to say that if I'm going to go somewhere in public, I have every equal right, and that I have the right to have equal access to anybody who doesn't have the same mobility need that I do, or somebody who's non-disabled. So for a restaurant, it would be the bathroom and the doorway, and can I still access things? So there's a level of equality that's put into the ADA. Well, in the Fair Housing Act was set in place for multiple unit dwellings, so condos, apartments. If there's a house structure that's got more than 4, then what the Fair Housing Act says is that because of anti-discrimination laws, that at least a certain percentage of those units have to be under specific titles accessible. So you think about the hotel room that you've gone into before, and it's got the big wide open doorway into the bathroom, and it's got a big open wide bathroom. That's under the Fair Housing Act, saying that for every number of units, a certain number of units have to be accessible. But there are no guidelines for residential real estate. And there's an argument back and forth as to whether there should be. I personally don't believe that there needs to be. That I don't think that it's fair for a builder if they have 4 lots and they're going to build 4 houses, that one of those 4 has to be accessible. But the idea is to educate the builders and let them know that, hey, if you do this, it's not only the right thing to do, but there's this huge number of consumers out there that are needing that. So when somebody says that a home is ADA, that's not necessarily true, because there really is no guideline. So when someone's talking about accessibility in the home, it might be based on accessibility standards or Fair Housing Act standards, but there is no true guideline for accessibility. And in our country, the average age of a home, and this is average now, so you've got East Coast homes, which are much older, you've got West Coast homes, which are much newer, but the average age for a home in our country is 37 years. So that means they were made in 1984. So in 1984, they weren't really thinking about accessibility, which is something that we're trying to change right now. So anyhow, it gives you an idea of where we've come from, and why we're here. Right now, part of the goal is to add this to more multiple listing services around the country, so other states have this, and then eventually get it to the point where the big heavies that are online and you can go search homes on will adapt our criteria. Now that Rezo has set our information into the standards, and everybody will be able to find it. So.
Yeah, I can't wait to continue seeing that grow. Thank you, Barry, for sharing the story, and tell Gavin thank you also for making an appearance. The story really reminds me, though, of that Margaret Mead quote, that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. It's these small things, though, that can make, and that aren't small, and that end up making such a big difference. Now, you shared a lot about how this is enabling you to help more people find their dream home, age in their home, increase the likelihood that new homes perhaps will consider these factors. But also, what does this mean for you as a realtor?
It allows me the opportunity, and not just me, but it allows other realtors the opportunity to work with clients who have mobility needs and truly be able to find what it is they're looking for. I mean, all real estate, every single real estate transaction is different. Every single one. Every single time I think I know something in the next transaction, I realize that I didn't really know it the way that I thought I knew it. And one of the things that has not been available in the past is, for me, example, I'm in a wheelchair. When Emily and I looked for our house, there were no processes in place for us to look for accessible houses. So we were just looking for ranch houses. We were looking for something that was one level. And then, so with what we've done in our multiple, it allows a realtor to be able to help somebody in a way that they wouldn't be able to help them before. Because again, every transaction is different, because every single person is looking for something different. So every client that I have, whether they have accessibility needs or not, I sit down and ask them, 100 questions. If they're looking for a home, well, what is it that you're looking for? Why are you looking for it? What are your wants? What are your needs? What are your must-haves versus what of your Barbie dream wedding haves? And what this does is this allows realtors to ask those same questions now with accessibility in mind. And that wasn't done before. And Tom and I actually just trained our first accessibility class for realtors last Friday. And what our hope is that we can train realtors all over the state and then eventually around the country, because the more realtors that understand this and know this, then the more end users and consumers will be able to capitalize on what we've been able to do.
Yeah, that's great. And also I was thinking, a lot about, I could imagine, you have clients who some have specific accessibility requests and others don't, but also as a realtor, it may also help you determine which homes am I going to show today? How am I going to show those homes? What team do we need to put in place as well? And so I think it hopefully will also open the door to employment opportunities as well, which I think will be really exciting. Yeah. So
yeah, that's actually something that we're working on right now, is changing. And I can't really talk about exactly what it is because it's in the legal side of things, but we're literally working on making real estate more accessible from the realtor's side. So for me being in a wheelchair, there are caveats and things that I can't do. I just can't do. I mean, I can't go up a flight of stairs into a split level home. So that limits what I can and can't do from the employment side. So there are things that are happening right now that are being looked at to possibly change that, because I would like to have more realtors and, you know, in chairs and with different disabilities out and do this. And the other thing is the deaf and blind community as well. You know, harder for somebody who's blind to be able to, you know, explain what a house looks like. But my son Gavin, who you were just introduced to a few moments ago, he's actually gone into houses with my cell phone that I couldn't get up the stairs, and he's walked up there with a Zoom meeting with clients to be able to show a house that I couldn't, you know, I literally couldn't get up the stairs to do. So it's there's a lot more to it. We're actually, you know, I'm excited about where it's going.
Yeah, and I think that leads into Heather's. I know Heather had a question. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually wondering, and then we've got some questions that the audience is starting to populate in, so we'll get to those as well. But you brought up, Barry, in that it's also a matter, it's not only a matter of educating real estate agents, and other people in the industry, but it's also a matter of educating clients, right? That this is something that is important and should be asked for, you know, like, and it should, this is information that should be communicated regularly. But as we know, with, you know, things regarding accessibility and you know, and disability, like that information tends to trickle slowly in different ways. And so I'm wondering what you, like, how do you have a vision for how to empower potential clients to be looking for these items, or to, you know, how are you getting the word out that that this is an important and necessary feature in the industry from a client perspective, more so?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. And what we're trying to do now is, it's a grassroots effort. You know, it's starting from the bottom and then moving itself up. So I have been in more meetings over the last few months with local disability support organizations, the University of Washington Spinal Cord Injury Forum. Just last night I was in ADAPA, which is the disability. Oh my gosh, they're going to get so mad at me for not remembering exactly what it stands for. But the Here and Now Project is another organization here in Washington that supports people with disabilities. So we've been going and enlightening them to what we're doing, because when a client who needs mobility goes to their realtor and says, hey, I'm looking for this, that's going to make that realtor either pass them over to me or learn what they need to know, you know, to be able to do this. So one of the other things that we did in our class on Friday, Tom and I both, we tag team trained this class for the Seattle-King County Realtors, was we actually had a disability etiquette section in the training, because there is fear. There's fear that that a realtor is going to say the wrong thing or not know what questions to ask. So part of this is educating our realtors to understand, you know, what does disability mean and what does accessibility mean with disability, and what questions should you ask. And just, you know, there was a question of, well, should somebody kneel down or stand over me when they're talking to me? That was a great question. And the thing is I can only answer that question because my best friend who's in a wheelchair, she doesn't believe the same thing that I do, and she would rather that somebody kneel down where I don't really care. So a lot of this is educating the clients to be cool with somebody asking them personal questions, and also educating the realtors that it's okay to ask questions. And I just had a client she's in a wheelchair and she's looking for a piece of property, and we were discussing what her needs were, and I asked her what side of the wheelchair she gets on and off of the toilet, and she was kind of taken aback, you know, and she doesn't know me that well. And she said, well, why? I went, well, because that dictates what bathrooms we're looking for you. Because if the toilet is on this side of the bathroom, then we're going to have to remodel the bathroom. But if the toilet's over on this side of the bathroom, we can put grab bars in and support around that, and we don't have to make a change. So I actually had to educate her to to learn and think about how she moves, because that actually has some implications on what it is that we're looking for her. You know, and so the whole thing is education. To just wander around your question, you know, it's about education and educating realtors that there are certain questions that you need to ask that might be uncomfortable, but by starting the conversation with, hey, I'm going to ask you some questions about what your accessibility needs are, or maybe even what your disability is, because I've got a client who's got MS and it's a progressive disease for this individual. And he's in a manual chair now, but there's probably going to be a power chair in his life in the future. So they're looking for homes that are accessible for a manual chair. I don't want them to have to move again in 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. So we're having that hard conversation now of saying, well, your age in place home, your true accessible home for the longevity of however long you want to stay is going to be us looking for something that's different than what you need today. So it really does come down to education, and the big picture of answering your question, and knowing that this is an uncomfortable topic sometimes, and that's okay. I giggle about it, and we have some jokes. And I've actually had a client meeting with one of my clients in the bathroom because he was having a tough day, and he was covered up, but we met there because we needed to meet. And I'm in a chair, he was in a chair, nobody really cared. It ended up being fine, and we found him a place. It's what you do. It's what you got to do. And you know what? And to be honest, some realtors aren't going to want to do it, and that's okay. And it's just like everything else. They've got so many other things to learn that I've actually already had realtors that have sent clients to me because I understand accessibility better than they do, and they know that I'm going to better serve that client than they are, and that's great. If that's what they want to do, then that's better for everybody.
Yes, options are always great. So we had two related questions to that from the audience. Jingsheng Li and Christy Bjornson both asked, do you have either interior designers or contractors that you work with to make the house more accessible?
Excellent question. Yes, I have no experience in either of those things, and I'm not good at either one of them. So I do. Tom and I actually have a team that we've put around us now. So we've got a team of, we have 3 different designers, one of whom is also an architect, and they specialize in accessibility. So we can send them, for example, I have a client who isn't sure whether she should remodel her house or whether she should move out of her house and get a new house that's more accessible. So I can't answer that question in terms of the accessibility needs that she has. So we have a designer who specializes in accessibility who went in and met with her, and they looked at the house and they determined that it was going to be more expensive to remodel the house than it would for her to sell and then move into a new house that's going to be more accessible. And we have architects that can come in and do the accessibility design. And then we're working on, and I have a couple of builders now that we've been grooming, because we're hoping, we want people to be able to be in the home that's the most suited for their need. And whether they need to just remodel their home and bust out a laundry room and turn it into a bathroom because they love their neighborhood and their school district, we'd rather have them do that than have to sell their house and buy a house. So, we're partnering up with builders that can either come in and remodel or can do a ground up accessibility build. That most builders can follow the instructions of an architect. So there's 4 architects that we've partnered up with in Seattle that all specialize in accessibility, and it's putting that whole team together is what is making us much more successful, because again, we don't know anything about architecture, and I only know accessibility from my perspective. So I want somebody else to come in and do the heavy lifting with that. And then another thing I just learned recently, one of my clients, she's deaf, and she's become a great friend. And right in the middle of a pandemic, when you're trying to work with somebody who's deaf, it was really challenging because everybody's wearing masks and she reads lips. So Gavin and I went and got masks that had clear, and then they fogged up. I'm like, oh. So we figured out what masks we can use, and that was a great experience for me as well, of figuring out, looking outside of the box of what I'm normally doing and bringing people in who are better at it than I am. So
thanks so much.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say thanks so much for that, Barry. And I mean, I think that's a great point in terms of, accessibility is an ongoing learning process. And I think it was Sarah, who's here today, also had mentioned in one of the previous chats that it's also a team sport. So that's just a perfect example of always learning and growing. And Sarah had a question as well in terms of the MLS the Northwest MLS is if you include multi-home buildings, and is there a way to verify? And she said, for example, my last building was listed as ADA compliant and had elevators, but these did not go to the gym or to the parking garage.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, all real estate is buyer beware for the buyer. I mean, it really is. The listing agent can do the best job they can to market a piece of property and sell it, and it's up to the buyer or the buyer's realtor, you know, in some cases, to go and actually confirm what that truly means. So in terms of the documentation within the multiple and within the system, there's no way to truly confirm what, not confirm, but I say believe almost, you know, because it's only as good as the information that they put into the system. So everything really does need to be confirmed. And that's a great question. And actually, you know, one of the things Tom and I are doing is we're revamping our forms right now to try and add things like that. And that's one of the things that we're adding to the actual Form 6B, that there'll be a section in there for the property. Is the property accessible? Can you get to the swimming area? Can you get to the gym? Can you get to the parking? What is the access, you know, to a bus stop? Those kinds of things that we're going to add right to the form that you know, hopefully the realtor will be able to look through it and say, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Let's go look. Or they'll say yes, and you need to confirm. So unfortunately, the answer to your question is every single piece of property still needs to be confirmed, whether what the listing broker said, because the listing broker might just be looking at the pictures too. They may not have actually gone and looked at the property with a tape measure to see whether the elevators are wide enough to get a power chair in, or whether you can get to the parking garage. So, and that's all real estate. That's not just accessibility. I mean, if somebody says you've got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, well, when you're in the house and you're like, you know, that's not really a 3rd bedroom, that's 2 bedrooms and a den, that's still confirmation that you need to do. So.
Yeah, great. And we had 2 more related questions from Sarah and Christy about aging in place. And so Sarah asked, do you think the increased need of people to age in place will increase the adoption? And then related, Christy said, you know, how much of this would also support aging persons who want to stay in their own home? So maybe you can speak a little bit more to those trends that you see.
Yeah, you know, both actually, when it comes right down to it. One of the things about accessibility that I've learned, and Tom has been a great educator for me, he was one of the founders of the Northwest Universal Design Council, is that, you know, universal design is really what we're talking about. Universal design is a set of criteria that's put in place to make a piece of property or whatever the design is accessible for the majority or the largest number of people that it can be. So with universal design and accessibility in mind, we want people to be able to stay in their home as long as possible. And there's some criteria. We want it to be accessible for the longevity of whatever it is their needs are and their lifespan is. It needs to be as safe as possible, and it needs to be convenient. So you put those things together. We're really talking about age in place with a barrier-free hook. So we want things to be barrier-free, and a barrier is just something that stops you from doing what it is you want. It's not necessarily a true barrier. It's what's stopping you from being able to live the most comfortable and safe life that you can. And age in place is just a term that that fits within the universal design and accessibility criteria that we're talking about. I joke about age in place because it's become almost a negative. When I've talked to several senior groups, and the age in place is oh yeah, well, I want to age in place until I have to go into the home or into the next thing. But we're trying to change that of no, age in place, it beats the alternative, because if you're aging in place, that means that you're still going forward, which is great. And in place means that it's something a place that you love, and it's a location that you want to stay. So, you know, we're really talking about age in place. You know, and it's not just about the aged community. It's about, you know, anybody. I want to age in place as long as I can in the home that I live in until I choose to go move somewhere else. So I hope I answered your question, but it really is, I mean, age in place is just another term that we use when we're talking to an elder audience, but it's really the same thing. And the other thing that makes me laugh is that we take an accessible bathroom, and we'll say that it's a universally designed bathroom, and people go, oh yeah. But if I say it's a European design bathroom, And people are like, "Ooh, really? Oh, I like European design." Well, it's the exact same thing. It's just we're changing the terminology because European sounds much more posh than than universal design. But I mean, really, you go into the hotel and you see that huge bathroom with the big wide hotel room and think, nice, we scored today. All that is universal design. And if it was in your home, age in place, or maybe barrier free. So the terminology is all kind of cross path, but it's really the same thing.
Thanks so much, Barry. Christy also had a question. You mentioned earlier that the whole state of Washington is now using this the Form 6B that you mentioned, and there's 3 other states. Which other states are those? She was wondering.
I should have written it down. Ohio was the first. I believe Illinois, and we're talking with Kansas, and I don't know whether they've actually implemented it or not. And what's been great is our Northwest Multiple Listing Service, and they've been fantastic. I can't say enough wonderful things about them, that they've actually taken it out of our hands now. So when a state reaches out to Tom or I and says, hey, we're interested in this, we actually hand them off to the MLS, because then legally the MLS can give them their forms. And we pretty much gave our forms to the MLS and said, here's what we've created. We worked with them. We gave it to them. The MLS owns that content. They've allowed us to use it in any way we want. But they've just given their form to the other MLSs to really drop it right into their system and adopt it. So there's been no, hey, this is ours ownership. They've been just fantastic at allowing the other states to do it. And Ohio reached out to us, and Tom and I did a training for them on why we did what we did and how we did it, so they can help implement it, in their system. One of the challenges we've got is that every MLS uses different technology. Every single one has a different vendor that built a different database that works in a different way, that uses different criteria. So that is a challenge, but we've given them everything that we've created and said, here, use it how you will. One of the other things just to keep in mind is the big online real estate companies that everybody knows, they all use different criteria. So if you go to Zillow or Redfin, you're going to find different information on the 2 of them. And that's because they're actually reaching out with their algorithm, and they're pulling data from all the multiple listing services, all the county records, all the school district publications, and each one of them decides which criteria their algorithm grabs. And that's why they have different information, is because they've decided that their algorithm is the best. So with what we're doing, we're just trying to put a data point out there that eventually they can all grab, and it's all going to be consistent across the board. And I know the Airbnb actually reached out to us, and we did a big long session of trainings with Airbnb, because they really want to make sure that if you're looking for an accessible vacation rental, it's different than a home. You can't go preview it first, and you get there and you've gone halfway across the country and you're in a power chair and you need a specific set of criteria for accessibility, and it's not that. There's trouble to be had. So we gave our information and worked with Airbnb as well to try and theirs is going to be much more extensive than us. They're actually really getting into the details about what it is that's needed for their system. So it's been fun to watch it kind of trickle out slowly as we're putting it together.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to put on my engineer hat now, and we do have a lot of engineers and designers on the call today. And, when you're talking about how you implemented this with the MLS, one of the things you said was that you're always limited by technology and the constraints. So that was the MLS technology. But now looking at the physical space and, the actual world of residential real estate, are there any places are there any things that you wish would be different, or that if you had like a visitability wish list or a residential real estate wish list, what comes to mind?
Yeah, so mine's waterfront, and that's
Me too, and my dog.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that's a great question. It's again for me. I'm the mountains guy and I'm the waterfront guy. So I want it to be. Wow, that's a great question. Thinking about it from the engineering side, when it comes to different homes, it's the bones of a home. Most homes, I would say probably 85 or 90% of homes aren't going to be accessible for the majority of people. So it's looking at the bones of a home and knowing that things can be changed and modified. Everything can be changed and modified. It's just a matter of cost. And you can have a tri-level house and you can make it accessible by putting a ramp all the way around, the house. It's going to be 150 feet, but you could do that. So when we're looking at homes for my clients, I'm really looking at it from how easy is it to modify to make it their dream home. Easily enough, usually with the bones, you can widen doors. You can sometimes widen hallways. If you've got a bathroom that you might need a track or a lift, like a ceiling tracking system, do the walls support that? And we're looking at homes from a kind of the inside of the walls perspective, because cosmetics can be changed easy enough. It's, do the walls and the bones of that home have what it takes for that person to, to be able to make it accessible, for what their needs are. I mean, for example, 3 steps into a house, I don't even think about that anymore. If it's a house that's only got 3 steps, I say it's adaptable. It's pretty much accessible because we can have a ramp put in a day. There was a house that when I first got into this, it was a house on my street that listed and it had disabled access, the old button. And I thought, sweet. So I bolted down and I looked at it and I called the realtor and said, hey, you said that this house is, got disabled access. When I see 4 steps to get in the front and 4 steps in the garage and 4 steps in the back, where's the disabled access? Oh, well, it's a ranch. Yeah, well, sorry. But from my perspective now, 4 steps, that's, we can get somebody up 4 steps pretty easy. So the bones of the house is what I'm looking at from engineering. So I know I didn't answer your question, but it's all a matter of perspective with this stuff.
No, it makes me imagine things like, well, all the county records have blueprints. It's actually really hard to get them. Now we have all these 3D tours of homes. Like, why can't that info be melded so that people can say like, oh, is that door behind me? Like, can it be expanded? What are the direction of the ceiling joists above us? Like, how do you make it easier so that people can more easily figure out what the loading, the flexibility, the modularity of a home is? Sounds like fun to me.
Well, and I actually that's where I bring in my builder. Luckily for me, I've got Mike McCrae in my office, who's like the builder master. And I call Mike and go, hey, Mike, can I send you a picture? Can you tell me, is that a load bearing wall? Because I don't know enough about what's on the inside. So that's why I have a team around me that I can go to, because they're all smarter than I am. So, it's being able to ask those questions. But, you just brought up a great point, is now because of the pandemic and COVID, we couldn't have open houses for months and months. Mm-hmm. So we really started using Matterport, and we've started using videos much more. And that has been hugely successful within my disability clientele, because it's hard to get a quadriplegic out of the house and into 2 or 3 other houses in a day. And I say that kind of stereotypically, but it is true. I'm thinking about my clients. It's hard to get them out. And we get to a house that's got 3 steps. You can bounce me up 3 steps. I'm not that big, but you can't bounce him up 3 steps. So being able to go into that house and use Matterport and use the videos, the technology has been fantastic, because I've got somebody who he can sit in his living room, and Gavin and I can go into a house and we can put the video camera on and pretty much show him everything that he needs to see without having ever been in the house itself. So capitalizing on that technology has been a huge benefit for us in real estate in general, but especially for my disability clientele.
That's a fantastic point. Thank you, Barry. And yeah, I mean, we've seen that in access to virtual platforms like this even, right? It just is really broadening the conversation that folks in the disability community were, talking about for decades before everyone all of a sudden needed it. And now it's like, oh yeah, no, now we kind of get it. We're getting close to ending here, but just wanted to, in our conversations between you and Kat and myself, you've mentioned that, one of the ways that you like to look at this is to really think of accessibility as sexy, right? And I think that ties into this notion of really impressing upon builders and contractors and things like that, not only is this functional and really making a difference for a lot of different people, but there's beauty and there's sexiness to it too, right? And so I don't know if you have any last thoughts on, you know, what your ultimate vision of this is, you know, whether it's all considered universal design or whether it's, you know, being able to kind of lay specific accessibility needs over that kind of concept, and what that means for home design.
Well, I love it, and I've said it. You know, accessibility can be luxurious and it can be sexy. We've had homes. So Tom and I started a company called Able Environments, and it's ableenvironments.com. And on our website we have a showcase button, and it's showcase homes that have accessibility that we've taken. And I took a whole bunch of my marketplace Sotheby's brokers down to this house, and we all went in and we toured this house. And I went, all right, everybody, where's the accessibility? And except for a couple of key folks who already knew what it was, nobody could see it. They didn't realize that just because that hallway was 5 feet wide and there was an 8-foot ceiling, there was accessibility. I could roll under every single sink in the bathroom, but the sinks were beautiful and they were luxurious. And the grab bars were actually hidden as towel bars that would go down, and all the accessibility was done in a way that you walk into this house or roll into this house and go, I want to live here. This is the coolest house I've ever been in, having no idea that it's probably the most accessible, universally designed home you've ever been in. You know? And that's something that I want people to think about, is that the stereotype of accessibility. And what's funny is when we first got into this, realtors would say, oh,